Hello and welcome to another edition of Chattin' with Janine. I'm your host, State Representative Janine Nodder. My guest this week is Hal Shurtleff. I've known you for almost a quarter of a century now.
I know.
I did the math this morning.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
we've had many conversations about books. And I was really excited to see that you wrote a book. So I invited you here to tell me about your book.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yes. This book is titled The Racist Roots of Planned Parenthood and Its Legacy of Death. And it's not like I did a lot of writing. What I did was I can get a little background. I knew about Planned Parenthood for many years, and I am a pro-life activist, and I think I started doing it in 1988. And I read a book called The Grand Illusions, The Legacy of Planned Parenthood by George Grant, which is a good-sized book, and it's a book I recommend to get a real good handle on Margaret Sanger, the founder, and what she. So I wasn't trying to replicate something that was done very well way back then, but a lot of things, obviously, there were that in his book that he probably didn't know about, and I remember getting a letter or a copy of a letter written by Margaret Sanger, which you can find online pretty easily. It was dated December 10th, 1939. And in the letter, she's sending the letter to a Dr. Clarence Gamble in Milton, Massachusetts, again, 1939. And in this 3-page letter, on page 2, she talks about something called the Negro Project. The Negro Project was their goal of introducing birth control to the black population because they sold it as well. Big black families, they're poor, it's too bad. But really, she had a dislike of blacks, and so didn't Clarence Gamble. They had a hatred of certain people. And so and their goal was to get black doctors, and the term colored was used in the letter, which, by the way, was not meant to be offensive. It was a term that was accepted back then. So they wanted to get black doctors and black clergy members to introduce the birth control in the black community. And they thought that Sanger would say that while blacks respect white doctors, they sort of let their hair down and run the black. They feel more comfortable among their own, and that was their. And on page 2 of the letter, she says, and I'm not quoting it verbatim, but she says something to the effect that we don't want word to get out that we wish to exterminate the Negroes. And she said that's why the doctors and the clergy will be able to communicate with the more rebellious members. Now, so Sanger's supporters, and she's got many, said people misconstrued that letter, like they take it out of context. And it's possible that she didn't want to exterminate the black race, but she did want to lower the births quite a bit. And that letter, by the way, her papers are stored at the Smith College Library in Northampton, Massachusetts. And you can actually find that, just put down Margaret Sanger Negro Project letter. So I was actually looking at it, it was probably 2018. I never looked at the mailing address where that letter was sent. And I noticed it was on Adams Street in Milton, Massachusetts. I was very familiar with that neighborhood. I used to, on the way to work for many, many years, I used to drive by Lower Mills, which is in the Dorchester section of Boston. And that's Adams Street, named after John Adams. He didn't live too far away. And there's a museum not too far from Gamble's house, the Forbes Museum. So I decided, Reverend Stevie Kraft, who's our camp chaplain, happens to be a black man. And at the time he was living in New Jersey, but we had him up on some speaking engagements, November of 2018. And actually it was November 30th. It was very interesting, and I'll tell you why that date I'll never forget. So I said, let's do a video across the street from the house where Gamble lived. Now, he died in 1966, and Gamble was a medical doctor. He was a Harvard graduate. He was the grandson of the Procter & Gamble founders, or one of the founders. Oh, okay. And he was a wealthy guy. And he was a eugenicist. He believed in purifying the race. And his specialty was spermicides, the early birth control. And there was a couple of birth control devices that they were being pioneered. And that was his thing. And so so I thought we would do a video, again, across the street from his house. And we wanted to qualify it as, look, if you're a pro-life activist, don't come down here and protest in front of the house. I don't know who owns the house, and he's long dead. So, but as I was videotaping, I realized that George H.W. Bush was actually born just a very short distance on the same road on Adams Street. It's a private residence. And I knew that his father, Prescott Bush, was Planned Parenthood's first treasurer. So I thought, there must be some correspondence between the two of them. And it took me a little while, but I didn't go to the Harvard Library, the medical school library, where Gamble's letters are stored, until January of 2020, right before the lockdown. Yeah. And I had pretty much access to all the papers, but there was no correspondence between Bush and Gamble. But there was plenty between Sanger and Gamble. And I had to take pictures of them. I couldn't go to a photocopy machine, which would have got a clearer image. And some of these things were, written. The papers were yellowed. It was typewritten many years ago. So I took about 80 pictures, maybe a little more than that. And I didn't use them all because some of them really didn't pertain to the topic. But it's just a fascinating correspondence. And not just Sanger and Gamble. Some of Gamble's correspondence, there was a letter to the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation asking for money to support Planned Parenthood International, which they did get off the floor. Also, there's a lot of the people mentioned in the letters. Their names are not too well known today, and they should be, because these are the ones that made all this happen. For example, the Negro Project was funded by a man named Albert Lasker. Now, the name Lasker, who's that guy? He was known as the father of modern advertisement. He was a Republican, and he worked on the Warren Harding campaign, and he donated over $220,000. Today would be about $500,000, and that money was used to start clinics in black communities in the South. And they did hire some black doctors, and they got lots of clergy involved, black clergy. In fact, in 1932, even before the Planned Parenthood was known as the Human, what was it called? Before it's called, they had another name. I'm going a mental block. But before it didn't be. I think it was called Planned Parenthood by 1942, and so they actually had a Negro Advisory Committee for the Birth Control League, I think is what it was, the earlier name. And so they had these black, mostly professional types and clergy advising, Planned Parenthood. So they completely bought into it. One of them I mentioned in the book was W.E.B. Du Bois. And Du Bois had this kind, I don't have time to look it up, but he was very pro-communist, and later on in his life he formally joined the Communist Party. That's why today you'll hear his name a lot during Black History Month, because he was a far left and he became a communist. But he had a comment in the book he wrote this in the Birth Control Review. That was one of Sanger's publications. And he talked about the Negroes that was considered inferior. That the ones that have too many babies are the ones that are at least the ones that shouldn't be having children. And I'm thinking, if this was a white man saying that, this guy is an overt racist. So he had an elitist attitude towards people of his own, in the black community. He and Booker T. Washington did not get along very well. He had a different. Booker T. Washington's goal was work hard, get a trade, make money, your generation, so the next generation can have it a little easier, get the education, the formal education, college education, what have you. And Booker T. Washington, and Du Bois was just this elitist, He would have been a very good member of the Council on Foreign Relations if he was asked to be. But also, one of the persons that worked with Sanger was Dr. Ernest Rudin. Dr. Rudin was a Nazi. He was the man in charge of the sterilization program in Nazi Germany, and he wrote for the Birth Control Review, and he actually was awarded a medal by Hitler. So he wasn't just he wasn't a real Nazi. He was just a well-meaning guy that got caught up in things. And he spent he visited the United States many times. They used to have eugenics conferences in Washington, D.C. And then in England, the same thing. So he escaped being at Nuremberg, the trial, the Nazi war crime trials, mainly because it would have been a big embarrassment to all the people he knew in the United States, because it was the United States that taught the Nazis about eugenics, not the other way around.
Really?
I mean, this forced sterilization and that sort of thing. Yeah. Well, I say eugenics is something that's been around a long time, and not necessarily that was not to say that Germans weren't part of that, but as far as the sterilization, we had a number of states that had sterilization laws on the books, forced sterilization laws.
I read about that. Or
Yeah.
I saw a movie
this famous,
about it a long
infamous
time
case.
ago.
It was in the 1920s, Maryland, Buck I can't remember, Buck versus whoever it was, and Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., not the poet, but the Supreme Court justice, said something to the effect that 3 generations of morons is enough. Come to find out, the woman that they sterilized had a normal intelligence. She was not even. It wouldn't have mattered, but the bottom line, you shouldn't be sterilizing anybody. So that was America back in the 1930s, and it was mainly led by people on the far left. She had another person that was an early founder of her organization. His name was Luther Stoddard. He was from Brookline, Massachusetts. This guy was a Klansman. So here you have communists and Klansmen and Nazis. You have to hand it to this wicked Margaret. She got people from all different backgrounds to support her agenda.
I know she didn't like Italians either, because I remember reading in Irish. She didn't like the Irish or the Italians, and what I know about her is she was a midwife, and she was alarmed that these communities, the Italians and the Irish, had so many children, and she wanted to see less
She
of
had
them.
a seething hatred of the Catholic Church and Christianity in general, and she was from an Irish background. Her father was from Ireland. He was a raving socialist. The mom was born here for a number of generations. She was a Catholic, and she would actually kind of bring Margaret to Catholic services, Catholic Church, even baptize her. But generally speaking, the father's views tend to win out. And that's the same thing for today. You know what I mean? If the mom's taking the kid, oh yeah, it's like 85% of if the fathers aren't involved with the spiritual upbringing, the children tend to leave. So mom might be taking them to church, whatever church that may be, but if dad's not there to reinforce it, they tend to leave the faith. So yeah, she was from a big family. She never graduated from nursing school. She called herself a nurse, but she never graduated. She ended up moving to upstate New York. She's from New York, but she ended up moving to just a little north, White Plains, I think, just a little north of New York City. She associated with some really unsavory people, and she was a sex degenerate. I mean, she hung up with that English pervert, Havelock Ellis. She had to flee the country because she had violated the Comstock law, that you can't put pornographic things through the mail, and they considered her materials that she was promoting for birth control to be pornographic.
Well, she'd fit right into today's world.
Oh, she would be a celebrity. That's why she's so well regarded today. But it's a little embarrassing because of her racist, overt racism. I remember, who was it? Hillary Clinton. I think she was testifying at Congress, and she got, by the way, the Margaret Sanger Award at one point. It was kind of interesting, other people who won the Margaret Sanger Awards. So, and also in my research, in these letters, I discovered something called the Puerto Rican Project. Now, I've been a pro-life activist. I mean, I don't know everything, but I never heard of that up until I came across these letters. And if you go on to a search, you'll find information about it. But if you didn't know it existed, you wouldn't be looking for the stuff, right? So what happened was the Puerto Rican Project was where guys like Sanger and a man named Dr. John Rock, another guy from Brookline, Massachusetts. Boy, they've got some. I was just interviewed by a friend who was from Brookline. I said, "You got some unsavory people from your town, you know." That's where Michael Dukakis is from too, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
But John Rock, who was a good Catholic, put that in quotation marks, he was one of the pioneers of the pill, the birth control pill. He was using some of his own patients. First, he was using animals, rabbits. And then he was using mental patients at the McLean Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts. And then they realized that the rules and laws in Puerto Rico, it was a territory of the United States, but not a state, they were kind of lax on this issue. So they enlisted the help of about 1,500 poor Puerto Rican women, and it was in a particular city, from 55 to 59 or so, and they used them as guinea pigs to test the birth control pills. Yeah. There was a few that died. There was some that got sick.
What I saw something about that. The early birth control pills.
Yeah.
Women would get clots and
Blood clots.
they die.
They die. And I think it was. I don't want to give the wrong drug company. But the drug company that pioneered this never compensated any of the victims or any of their families, and they made millions and millions of dollars on it. And there's the last letter that I have in the Gamble Library. He's addressing it to the 4 ladies that actually oversaw the project. And one of the ladies, whose name I can't recall, she was known as the mother of the birth control pill. And by the way, Dr. John Rock was a recipient of the Margaret Sanger Award. He might have passed away in the 70s, early 80s, so he got a lifetime achievement award, I guess, the Margaret Sanger Award. So so that kind of surprised me. Here was the Puerto Rican project, and it was what was interesting too. They just Charles Stewart, who was a man who murdered his wife. The wife was pregnant, so he murdered his wife and unborn child. And this happened in Boston in the 80s. And he blamed it on a black. He said, I was attacked there was a black man, and here's his description. And they had this big manhunt in Boston based on this description that this man gave. And they arrested a couple of guys. Kind of find out that Charles murdered his wife and his unborn baby. The reason being is that she wouldn't get an abortion. Oh. Now, when Mayor Wu revisited that, she just playing the race card, and I said she never mentioned what motivated the murder. That's interesting. Anyway, I don't know why I brought that up, because I was just talking about it recently, but I thought that was an important thing to bring up here. So we got Albert Lasker. Now, his wife, Mary Lasker, she married, Lasker was her second husband. She married an art dealer in New York City, very wealthy guy. They got divorced. She was an associate of Margaret Sanger. She ran one of the birth control places in New York. So if you're a friend of Sanger, you're probably a sex pervert yourself. And it's my contention that they were pushing birth control more so just to deal with the externalities of their lifestyle, in other words, so-called unwanted pregnancies. That's what I think that was mainly about. They wanted to do their sexual sin and not worry about the consequences of that sin. Although they didn't regard it as sin, of course, we do. And she ended up marrying Albert Lasker. I'm wondering if Sanger may have introduced the two at some gathering. She was much older. They went on to found the Lasker Foundation.
That sounds familiar.
Well, if you do a search, they're still around. You'll go a search, and you will find they do medical research, I believe. And if you look at, I went to their website prior to the publication of this about a month ago, and they have nothing but high praise for their founders. Nothing about the Negro Project, nothing about their racist background. So I sent an email, to general inquiries, and I said, do you have a statement on the racist roots of your founders? And they never got back to me. I sent several, and I had some friends do it too. They didn't get back to us. Now, Mary Lasker, they founded he died in 52, Albert. She died, I think, about 20 years later. She was a good friend of Lyndon Johnson. And she was a Democrat. So Lasker was a Republican. She, what's his name, James Carvell, and his wife, she's a Republican, and he's a Democrat. Isn't that cute,
mixed marriage, yes.
Yeah. So anyway, they were lobbying for socialized medicine and for federal involvement in medical research. And eventually, that was their big claim. Oh, we got that done. We got federal money into research. To me, that's dangerous, because you're mixing government and medicine. And if the government is funding something, they control it. It's not some kind of benevolent, we want to help you out. This is your findings. We don't agree with the findings, then we'll fund somebody else. Well, they do that with the climate change issues.
The irony here is Margaret Sanger is still very popular today, and people look up to her. And she was a racist, but our founding fathers, they're being trashed today.
I know,
because they owned slaves, which we
some
all know is horrible
some of them owned
sin.
slaves.
Yeah, some did. We all know that's a horrible sin, but back in the day, it was normal and considered normal. Isn't that awful?
Well, there's a term called presentist. A presentist is someone who judges the past by today's standards.
What's that word?
Presentist.
Presentist.
Yeah. So So we look at how life was 200, 300, 1,000 years ago. And by the way, we don't have a moral high ground to judge history with our abortion and our crazy policies that we've been enacting with the LGBTQ. So we're really not in a position, we as people, not necessarily you and I, but as a people, who are we to judge? We have no trouble with slave labor. We don't have a trouble getting. We get stuff from communist China. It doesn't seem to bother most of the progressive, leftists. So if you're against slavery, shouldn't you always be against slavery? There's slavery today in some Muslim nations. They don't seem to bother them any. So, but the slavery issue, it was legal. It was legal all over the world.
What is the future
it wasn't
going
just
to think
United
about
States.
today?
What's that?
What are the people of the future going to think about today?
It all depends on us. If we're able to get revival and get people back to God, that's really the issue. I never thought I'd live to see Roe v. Wade repealed. I thought it was a wonderful thing.
But a lot of people have a misconception about Roe v. Wade.
Oh, I know they do.
And they actually don't know the law. And I think that they were lied to. I think the voters were lied to because we had people yelling at us at Paul, you banned abortion. And I'm like, we didn't. For 6 months, you have half a year.
Yeah, yeah.
After half a year, you haven't made up your mind. It's a little late.
Yeah.
And there's even exceptions in the law. So now I had to print out the RSA so I could show people you were lied to.
Yeah, yeah.
It's 6 months. Do whatever you want.
That's right. In New Hampshire. Yeah.
In New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire, yeah.
It's after 6 months, and there's with exceptions. So if the child has medical problems, they can still terminate.
Sure. See, what that did was just throw it back to the states. Roe v. Wade should never have been, they should have never have taken that case. They should have kept it where it was. But they federalized it, and the Supreme Court cannot overturn laws that were duly passed in states. They just decided, well, this is unconstitutional. They found some things that didn't exist in the law. And even some liberals will say quietly that that was a bad decision. And so states went along with it. So, but today, states can outlaw it completely. They can make it down to 5 weeks or 15. It's interesting, too, is that, the left likes to, look at Europe. They've got socialized medicine. Why don't we have that? Look to Europe. Yeah. Well, most European nations, abortion after 15 weeks is illegal.
Right. That's true.
We're like North Korea. New Hampshire, in Massachusetts, or North Korea, we're after 24 weeks. I think North Korea you can probably get any time you want. So we're in the league, most of the states, these leftist states, and even some so-called purple states, and there are states that are writing abortion like Ohio, into their constitution.
Right. Well, they tried to do that here.
It's going to be awfully hard to take an oath to defend a constitution that says it's okay to kill babies. If I was in Ohio, I don't know if I could be a legislator, and I'd have to make some kind of. I said I'll obey most of this, but not that part. I'd have to make an exception. How can you support it?
That's awful. The world we live in today. It's
I think that when I was at that March for Life in 2020, I was so impressed. First off, there were just hundreds of thousands of people, and most of them were under 30. And they were people of faith. Some of them were Protestants, the Catholics. What was that? That Catholic, it's a men's group. Property, it's an acronym for it. But I was very impressed with them. They had a very a good presence down there.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I've never been. I know people who go.
It was a relatively mild day because it was probably in the mid 40s, low 50s, because you're there for a long time, and that was the only time that a president attended that event
President
in
Trump.
person. And like Moheda, he appointed pro-life justices. As a result of that, Roe v. Wade was overturned. And again, it doesn't mean that women can't get abortions anymore. It just means it's the way it should be. How are we doing for time?
3 minutes left. Your book, if somebody wants to find out more information on the book, do you have a website?
Sure. Our website is campconstitution.net. And you can get information about the book on the. I just wrote a blog with a lot of information about the book, and that sort of thing. If you go to when you go to our website, you'll see Camp Blog. Click it on, and I think the Granite Grok covered it too. In fact, they did. The Granite Grok.
Yep, I'm familiar with Granite Grok.
Which is a popular. By the way, the Granite Grok is listed by the Southern Poverty Law Center as an anti-government group. And I thought, how come we're not? So I noticed that
How come you're not?
they have us listed in North Carolina because our camp manager, who happens to be the volunteer, that's where people send their applications to when they sign up for their camp. So I thought it was kind of funny. I got a hold of them. I said, well, all the money you get from scared white liberals and big corporations, you can't do enough research to discover that we're New Hampshire based, not North Carolina. Please change it.
That's funny. Well, we only have a couple minutes left, so thank you for coming onto the show.
Oh, I love it. Thank you for having me. Yeah. We go back. I say we go back a long way here.
Long
We've
time.
been a guest on the show, and
yeah.
I do want to mention our late friend Sam Blumenfeld. We have the archive on our website. So if you see our website, you'll see the drop down, the Blumenfeld archive, access to his books, PDF versions, about maybe 2 weeks worth of his speeches. I mean, if you just played it, it would take 2 weeks, 24 hours, to play them all. So again, campconstitution.net is where you can find all that good stuff.
So I'm a founding member of the Sam Blumenfeld
That's
Reading
right.
Foundation.
That's right. You are. That's right.
I remember the day we signed the papers for that. There was cameras all going off, and I don't know where that picture is.
I do I'm the president now, and so I have to do their annual report for the state of New Hampshire. And
am I still on the board?
you are, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, you're still on.
All right. Now we're out of time. But
Okay.
Nice to see you, Hal.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching.